The Imperial Germans were the undisputed kings of submarine design and technology during the early years of World War I. The U-boat was justifiably feared by enemy navies, both military and merchant. U-53 was laid down on March 17, 1915 at the Germania Werft dockyard in Kiel and joined the Imperial fleet on April 22, 1916. She had a displacement capacity of 715 tons at surface and 1,060 tons when submerged. She could attain a surface speed of up to 17.1 knots, or 19.6 miles per hour, and an underwater speed of 9.1 knots, or 10.4 miles per hour. U-53 could travel at surface for 5,500 miles at 8 knots, or 9.2 miles per hour. U-53 was powered by two 6-cylinder 200-horsepower diesel engines. Her munitions included two 500mm torpedo tubes at the bow and a further two at the stern, with 6 torpedoes available. She also carried one 88mm gun and one 52mm gun. She could carry a crew of 36, comprising 33 sailors and 3 officers on board. An interesting accessory in the sub was a third periscope to the fore of the engine room to be used by the chief engineer. Not that much is available online about Hans Rose. What we do know is that he was born on April 15, 1885, in what was then the village of Charlottenburg, today located in the inner-city region of Berlin. Rose was always drawn to the Navy. At age 18 in 1903, he joined what was then the Kaiserliche Marine or Imperial Navy as a sea cadet, or sea cadet. By 1914, he was promoted to Captain Lieutenant, or Captain Lieutenant, being made the commanding officer, or CO, of a torpedo boat. The following year, when the First World War was already in full force, Rose joined the U-boat school or U-Boot-Schule and was quickly made the commander of the U-boat designated as U-2. Hans Rose acquired a reputation in the Navy for being a highly intelligent and respected officer and commander. He could be ruthless in battle, but was good to his men and even a humanist with the enemy. By 1916, he would become a part-time instructor at the U-Boot-Schule before returning to active duty as the commander of U-53, the U-boat that would be at the center of his famous trip to America. As we shall soon find out, the intent behind U-53's secret mission to America was relatively straightforward, but it was an important mission, and Rose no doubt knew that. There were challenges from the outset. For one thing, U-boats were still slow. For another, U-53 was a relatively small submarine, and as we already know, this class of U-boat in 1916 only had a range of about 5,000 miles. As such, Rose had to reconfigure his ballast and trim tanks to hold fuel and water respectively in order to ensure that U-53 successfully undertake the return voyage to America. Retrofitting 4 ballast tanks into fuel tanks dramatically increased the range of U-53 from 5,500 to 7,800 miles, or from 8,850 to 12,550 kilometers. That was very impressive for the time. And so it was that U-53 would make its way to Rhode Island on America's eastern seaboard. It was 2 p.m. on October 7, 1916, and the sub was on a heading for Newport. At that exact time, the coastal submarine D-2, commanded by U.S. Navy Lieutenant G.C. Fulker, was patrolling the waters off Rhode Island when it suddenly sighted a submarine. The American sub radioed the German sub, resurfaced, raised its American flag as a show of authority, and proceeded to sail parallel to U-53. U-53 did some evasive maneuvers at first, but eventually relented and sailed above surface alongside D-2. The two submarines reached the Breton Reef lightship outside Narragansett Bay, at which time Captain Rose hailed Lieutenant Fulker by megaphone, requesting permission to enter Newport Harbor. Fulker was able to give the okay after consulting with his superiors by radio, to which the German commander responded once more by megaphone, "I salute our American comrades and follow in your wake." And so it was that the German U-boat was escorted by the American submarine through the bay's East Passage into Newport Harbor. What transpired after that was like something out of a film, a type of farce that some people might say could never happen in real life, but it did happen, and it's worth retelling here in some detail. Picture the scene. The German submarine pulled up to buoy number 2 in Newport Harbor, right next to the United States Naval War College. Captain Rose caught a water taxi and drew up to Dewey Field, got out and walked up the hill, and strode to the largest building, known as Luce Hall of the War College. He knocked on the door, and when it opened, he smiled and said, "Hello, my name is Hans Rose. I'm here to send a postcard." Rose then asked to be presented to Admiral Austin Knight, the head of the Naval College. He was led up to the second floor of Luce Hall and met with Admiral Knight, who was stunned that a German officer was standing before him. The Admiral asked Rose, "Why are you here?" He reminded Rose that the United States was a de facto neutral power and that Rose had brought a war vessel into a U.S. harbor. As such, the Americans could arrest him and sequester his submarine. Rose responded by assuring the Admiral that all he wanted to do was send his mother a postcard. He just wanted to call upon the Admiral as a courtesy between naval officers. However jovial and polite, there's no denying what Captain Hans Rose was imparting to Admiral Knight and the American establishment. The message was clear. I can bring my German submarine right into one of your harbors, and so my country, Germany, suggests that your country not get involved in this war. It was a simple message, really. Captain Rose then invited the Admiral down to the U-53 submarine. There was the promise of apple schnapps and freeze-dried cigars on board. Out of respect for naval tradition, Admiral Knight agreed to the offer and went down with Rose to go aboard U-53 and meet some of the other officers and crew on board the submarine. The Americans were, of course, very eager to find out what they could about the U-boat. Stunningly, Hans Rose was only too happy and very forthcoming in telling Admiral Knight and other American officers all about the torpedoes and other attributes of U-53. Rose joked tellingly about how the sub could dive very deep in order to evade sonar and detection by surface ships. Rose and his crew were downright cheerful throughout the encounter. The Americans were impressed by what they saw of the U-boat. A U.S. Navy intelligence report would later describe the German submarine as well-designed, very clean and extremely neat, with no trace of foul air anywhere. Foul air was something notorious on most submarines of that era. In the meantime, scores of servicemen and civilians alike had excitedly swarmed around the German U-boat, admiring its sleekness and taken aback by a German sub being in port. The crewmen of U-53 lounged on the decks and chatted with the local press and residents who came alongside. They even played German music on the submarine's phonograph to entertain the assembled Americans. One can only imagine how gobsmacked the Americans must have been by the sheer chutzpah displayed by the Germans. In the moment, it had to be checkmate in favor of Imperial Germany. The United States had been proven to be vulnerable. It was diplomatic intimidation at its most cynical and Germanic. Washington, D.C. quickly got wind of what was going on in Newport, and Woodrow Wilson and his cabinet were furious about the brazen actions of the Germans. Admiral Knight and his cohorts were instructed to order the German submarine the hell out of American waters. Captain Rose and his men were thus politely told to leave, which they immediately did. And so U-53 eventually sailed out of Newport Harbor, but not before Captain Rose threw a life vest into the water. It was a theatrical display at all the yachtsmen excitedly following the sub, and just before U-53 dived into the depths, Captain Rose was heard bellowing out to all, "Good luck!" And with a final wave, his hatch closed and U-53 dove down. Just 2 hours had elapsed between U-53 mooring itself in Newport Harbor and the submarine leaving town, so to speak. Mission accomplished for Captain Hans Rose. But U-53 didn't just disappear into the Atlantic on its way home to Germany. No, it lurked about in the waters just off the approaches to Narragansett Bay and proceeded to sink not one but 5 Allied merchant ships in just 24 hours. All of them were targeted in the principal shipping lanes bound for New York City. Cleverly, this was all done in international waters so as not to violate American waters. The 5 merchant ships sunk in just 24 hours included 3 British ships, the 3,449-ton SS Stefano, the 4,321-ton SS Strathmore, and the 3,847-ton SS West Point. Also sunk was a Dutch steamer, the 4,850-ton SS Blommersdijk, and the 4,224-ton SS Christian Knudsen from Norway. 17 U.S. destroyers were dispatched to rescue survivors, but not one of them dared fire on U-53. And why not? Because America was still neutral, remember? It had no reason to engage with a German vessel in international waters. With every single ship, all passengers and crew had been allowed to vacate the vessel before U-53 torpedoed the ship and sank it. The British were particularly outraged by what U-53 had accomplished in Newport and thereafter, even more so than the Americans. They were incensed at the impunity of Captain Rose and his crew, not to mention the havoc they wreaked in the 24 hours after departing Newport. 3 British merchant vessels were sunk and the British wanted revenge. The Royal Navy tried to quickly dispatch a number of ships from its Canadian base at Halifax in Nova Scotia, but the Germans had long departed and it was too late. They couldn't even try to catch U-53, since the German submarine was able to cover an astounding 7,500 miles without needing to refuel. U-53 did have attempted attacks by Allied ships along the way, but successfully evaded them all. Hans Rose would end his submarine career as the 5th most successful Great War German submarine commander. His stats, all of which were while at the helm of U-53, were impressive. His submarine sank 79 merchant ships totaling 213,987 tons, and damaging a further 9 vessels totaling 45,291 tons. Ships sunk by U-53 included steamers and passenger steamers, sailing vessels, tankers, and trawlers from a host of different countries, including Britain, the Netherlands, Norway, France, Russia, Sweden, Greece, Italy, Spain, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, the United States, Portugal, and Iceland. U-53 under Rose also sank the American destroyer, USS Jacob Jones, on December 6, 1917, making it the first American destroyer sunk in World War I. One wonders what Admiral Knight and others back at Newport made of that news. As for Hans Rose, he was awarded Germany's highest honor, the Pour le Mérite, in December 1917, and further awarded the highly prestigious Ritterkreuz des Hohenzollernschen Hausordens mit Schwertern, or Knight's Cross of the Hohenzollern House Order with swords. He ended World War I with the rank of Korvettenkapitän, or junior commander. U-53 wasn't so lucky. The U-boat was surrendered to the victorious Allies in 1918 and broken up in Swansea, Wales in 1922. Between the wars, Rose would go into private industry and then, for just 3 months in May 1940 during the Second World War, he would take command of the Unterseeboots-Ausbildungsabteilung, or U-boat training unit of the Third Reich. He finally left military service with the rank of Fregattenkapitän, a rank above what he held in the First World War. The U-boat man, who was referred to by British intelligence as Old Hans, is at it again, would return to private industry after World War II and died in the winter resort town of Winterberg on December 6, 1969, at the age of 84. Hans Rose will forever be known as the man who tried to prevent America joining the First World War by paying Newport a visit in his U-boat. It's an astonishing tale. Perhaps it's time the story was made into a major film, wouldn't you agree?